Hello, everybody. Welcome to this morning's impromptu episode of Coffee Kegs in Kriegsspiel, or at least impromptu for me because I wasn't necessarily planning on streaming it. Dave, however, has a very carefully planned experience for us, and he's going to talk about an umpire focused system. So it's not impromptu for him, it's just impromptu for me, who never seems to have his technical act together. But it's working now. So without further ado, I'm going to turn my face off here. I'm going to turn this over to Dave, and he's going to go over some thoughts that he has for what we call an umpire focus system that should enhance the Kriegspiel experience for both players and umpires. So, Dave, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much. Over the last couple of months, I have had some time to, yeah, allow myself to play more open Saturday games, and I, in the downtime, I was just thinking of ways to make a game more streamlined and more, I guess, friendly to newer players, and just something a little different. So I put my thoughts together in this lovely presentation that I'm going to do for you today, and I'd love to hear some thoughts on it. And I'd love to play a game sometime soon to see if my theory works. Now, I mean, really, that these are just kind of posing questions. Is it going to be a friendlier system? Is it going to be more interactive and engaged for players? And is it going to be is it going to be a quicker system? Now, the conventional method that we have in the IKS and games that which have branched out over the years, typically you have a head umpire and hang on. Typically you have a head umpire and assistants and it's all a little bit crazy. But I mean, I'm going to say there's nothing wrong with the conventional system that we have at the moment. I think it's a great system. It's flexible. It works with all manner of ranges of games. It's easily used via Discord, and it's an established method. It works. There's nothing wrong with it. But can we just make it a little bit more friendlier? Because as we all know, if you've played in these games, it can be a little bit lonely on the downtime, especially if you're just kind of sitting in silence for 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long it takes to run a turn. It may not be the best for staff games because of that fact. Often sometimes in games, players want to reach out and they want to gain information by finding their commander or going next to the guy next to them rather than perhaps concentrating on commanding their troops. It's basic human nature. We all want communication and we all want to know what's going on. And often in games, we do see little tea parties of conglomerates of officers coming together that you wouldn't probably see on a conventional kind of battlefield. Now, I did some thinking. And this is going to be some very basic diagrams. But here we have kind of a typical, I'd say, system at the moment. This is the conventional system when it comes to kind of verbal interactions. You've got the head umpire that might be looking after the CICs, in charge of a certain portion of the map, and their assistant umpires maybe might look after two, three, four players, depending on the brigades and the divisions that you have. And if you're lucky, you might have a courier umpire that obviously deals with traffic. Now, there's lots of intersecting systems here. And if you have an assistant umpire, which may be dealing with more players because they're more experienced, or maybe is kind of trying to help a new player, and it might slow things down for the rest of people, and it looks a little bit messy, and there's chances of oh yeah, I've done my guys, can we keep rolling, and what have you, and what have you. And then I was thinking, okay, well, in a typical game also you have the physical interactions. Now this is a bit of a mess of a diagram, but I'm trying to kind of point that in a conventional kind of setup, the head umpire, he might be, again, moving pieces for the commander units, and if they have any kind of core assets or what have you, and the assistant umpires are doing the same. So in 15 minutes, say, you have from anything from like 12 to 20 elements that your brain just has to deal with. Especially if you're not lucky to have a courier umpire. The assistant umpires have to deal with that as well. It can get confusing, and it might even, just to a new player who has found us, it just might look a bit intimidating, and it does take a few tries to get to grips to. We're always looking for new umpires and more people to play these types of games. But when you're kind of dealing with the verbal communication and all this in a very tight time frame, it can get stressful. We've all seen the umpire table get a little bit heated sometimes, but there's nothing wrong with it. It still works. It's just a little bit chaotic, and not in a good way. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I mean, this is how my brain is visualized. Everything that goes on in the table. And we have a typical rundown of what different umpires might have to deal with. Now, my question here is, a head umpire, say, if they developed a new system, because we're always looking for new systems to pose questions of how to run a different game, whether it mean Napoleonics or 7 Years' War, whatever. Do they really get to run their system and stress test the rules that they've written if they are, shall we say, more busy in catering to players? I'd probably say not. In a conventional method, because they also have to teach the system and attend to assistant umpires that might have come in and not just kind of put their hand up one Saturday morning and say, I'm going to umpire this looks fun, and they don't really get the chance to really test their rules, as it were. And especially if that system is supposed to speed up play, I think we have these wonderful systems that run rather well, but we can't really seem to improve the speed of turns. Obviously, your courier umpire, if you're lucky to have one, might attend players and deliver orders, etc. And obviously, the assistant umpires sometimes might roll a dice or move pieces and what have you. Now, what does the player do? Well, he gives orders and he waits. And like I mentioned before, they'll sometimes want to talk to other players by default, and they'll eventually try and seek out that kind of verbal communication just to either find out what's going on, or just kind of develop a tactic to try and win the scenario. And then you have that kind of tea party type thing, and it's lonely at the top when you're commanding a brigade and what have you. And when you're on Discord, it can get a little bit boring, when you're sitting on your own. Now, in this particular system that I've set up, I've tried to eliminate the points of contact, if you will, and kind of boil it down a bit. Now, we still keep the relatively same structure, But the only thing that assistant umpires have to do is speak to the lowest rung of command. So, I mean, here we have our brigades, and they're just speaking to one person. And we then essentially use the command structure of the military to relay that information. Now, because I have a thing where, you know, in war and in our particular games, there is in our particular games rather, there might be a little bit of umpire bias, shall we say. If you have this assistant umpire and he's looking after four different elements, if you're always getting a report from that umpire, he's always going to tell you what's going on, but he's always going to tell you what he sees on the board and not maybe what a lowest rung brigade commander might interpret the battle going. If that makes sense. So there's always a risk for that kind of umpire bias in reports, because you don't want to not give the right information, but you know what I mean. So in this whole kind of structure, we've got I've remapped the verbal interactions, if it were, where, as I mentioned, the assistant umpire and the umpires only really talk to one another, and they flip backwards and forwards just talking to one person. Now, some people might be already saying that, this system looks rather umpire heavy. And it probably is. And I probably want to go back to, I forget the gentleman's name, and it has been talked about in many games before, about implementing this whole kind of timekeeper pit boss, to kind of really separate what I would say would be operations and administration. And to kind of allow the head umpire to do their job and really test the system that they're running, rather than cater to players. So the head umpire really only interacts with his other umpires. There is no need for the head umpire to do reports. He's just there to roll dice and make sure that the system is working. And the pit boss can deal with the player and timekeeping, as it were. Now, in this particular system, like I mentioned, you probably need maybe 38, maybe 39 players just to get it right. Now, I mean, this is more of a staff system type of thing. I mean, you could only have one player in one position, but then you'd have to race back to the assistant umpire once he's given his report to the division. So I've kind of put two players in each as like a little staff system. And then one of those players, after he's got the report from the assistant umpire, would then request to the timekeeper or pit boss to send a message to his division commander. Now, with couriers and stuff, we like to type out on Discord a little message, and I think that's fine. But if you're kind of going to send a runner, you're going to send more or less. You're going to give him verbal communication, because it's quick and it's effective, and you're going to waste time if you start to get your quill and pen out. Which we all know anyway. Now, with that, the physical interactions go down on the board very quickly, because the assistant umpires are only really managing the brigades or battalions at that lowest rung. And once they've done that and they've got the orders, then they can quickly go back to that Discord room and begin to say exactly what's happening to that brigade commander. Now, the timekeeper boss might also have to deal with some divisional or core assets, but arguably it is less to manage for the individual that is the umpire. Now, I mean, I kind of expanded the idea from the last slide, and that's why I kind of put 39 players, because you could have two pit bosses managing each team, which obviously reduces the physical interactions even less, which, you know, would in theory speed up the game. And then it would just be up to the red pit boss and the blue pit boss to kind of say, right, I've got all my guys that are moved. Have you? Yeah, okay. And then we just kind of say to the head umpire, okay, we're rolling on another 5-10 minutes, or what have you. And then, you know, all of the, shall we say, game, as it were, is concentrated with the lower rungs of command, and it is then up to those lower rungs, like the brigade commanders, to pass on the information that they think is relevant up the chain of command, as you would do in a conventional fight. Because, you know, it's all right if the umpire is giving a report to a corps commander, but he would no doubt say it differently to someone who is experiencing that situation. Now, this is just an expansion on that thought. I mean, my thinking is that, you know, if you've got this assistant umpire that has very few assets to manage, he can jump in and out and give this brigade commander reports every 2 to 3 minutes potentially, because, you know, if there's only one point of verbal contact, and okay, you know, you might have that brigade commander thinking, but I should probably stipulate that, this could all be really run in more or less a real time type of thing, in order to have people concentrate on seizing the initiative and giving orders that you know, don't slow down the movement and deployment of troops. So yeah, my thinking was that a brigade commander could get, you know, a report every, you know, 2 minutes from this assistant umpire, and then maybe as his fellow staff member moves up the line, because, you know, you have to take in account to travel information and everything, which I'll get onto in a moment, then they're probably going to get a report every 10 minutes, and then equally the CIC or the corps commander 15 minutes, as you'd probably expect. Now, as I've been hinting, the key to this system would be the pit boss timekeeper, rather than, yeah, the head umpire, shall we say. Now, this is just another basic diagram. As the timekeeper and pit boss is kind of managing these couriers and information that is going backwards and forwards, you could essentially have an in-transit room where I like to think would be almost self-governed by the people that are in this transit room. You know, obviously with a conventional system, there is less opportunity to teach, because you're, to cheat rather, because you're siloed in your little things, unless you start having a tea party, or, you know, someone is in your vicinity that you can talk to and talk tactics and what have you. Now, the pit boss duty would be to time keep and to, you know, manage this transit room, as it were, that people could, honestly, just have a nap while they're just waiting, for the game to progress. And then he can then give, a few screenshots to the higher position guys and what have you, and it just looks like, from a visual perspective, that it would be cleaner and work better. But I'll move on to the next slide to kind of say what I mean. So let's say, game time here, we've got Ben, he's in the first brigade, and real time, half an hour into an open Saturday session type of thing. And he basically pings the pit boss, or even just reports to this transit room himself and say, look, I just got into this Discord room at real time, half four, and he kind of reports in, and then the pit boss kind of has this little matrix, if you will, just kind of jots them down and says, okay, he's arrived into this room in the game time of 5 minutes past 8 in the morning, but and I reckon it's going to take him 10 minutes to ride a couple of kilometers on his horse, and I reckon we can do that in 10 minutes. And then by that time, at 25, he can then go in to speak to his division or corps commander, or whoever he's trying to reach. And then Bill here is the same, and what have you. And then after Ben has given his report to the division commander, he then automatically goes back into this little transit room and says, hey, it's now 16:43. If it took me 10 minutes to get here before, I reckon it'll take me 10 minutes to get back. Fine. And then the pit boss would just manage this little matrix and of communication, and therefore you have the players giving the reports to higher rungs of command without really that much interaction for assistant umpires, and that kind of
so instead of copying and pasting a dispatch, you're moving a person from one room to the other.
Precisely, I mean, and then you like that kind of second staff player almost just becomes that courier.
Become a courier.
Yeah. And then exactly. And then we're always talking about interior lines of communication and seizing initiative and stuff like that. And with the conventional methods, even though there's nothing wrong with it, if we're going 10, 15 minutes turns, it's very hard to really recreate that importance of having that effective communication and seizing the interior lines and what have you. And that's my kind of thought, because we're always kind of going through that system of everyone has a it's fair because everyone is getting reports every 10, 15 minutes or whatever. But in real warfare, that's not the case. You have to manage your communication effectively to move troops. This is just a basic type of thing. Obviously, if you got your interior lines sorted out, and this blue player would effectively have more people going back and forth quicker in order to organize the defense. But you get the picture. So there's no name method that I've kind of drawn up in my head, and it's nothing new under the sun. I think it allows the head umpire to focus more on the rules that they have created. It still remains as flexible as the conventional system. It can still easily be used via Discord, and even in a convention setting where you could have players running around to in that kind of transition room and reporting to the umpire who manages that room. Bless you.
Really, you heard that? I thought I was muted.
No, you're fine.
Oh my gosh.
and it really makes use of the military structure that we already have for reports, because it's very important that the commander has reports from those below him, rather than the umpire telling him what's going on, because the umpire will instinctively know differently than the player. It can still facilitate 10 to 15 minutes. It's yet to be proven, but I think with that, less to manage for assistant umpires and head umpire concentrating on what he does, then I think we're onto a winner here. And like I said, it kind of eliminates umpire bias and provides more agency to a player. Arguably it's more social because you're not sitting on your own, and it's in itself it's self-regulated by the player because no one is, in theory, if you've got four people sitting in that room, they're not all going to be crooks and want to cheat.
Right, right.
The only downsides, I think, maybe it might be quite heavy on the timekeeper or pit boss, but once you're ironing out the creases, I think it could be good. And as I said, it's not properly stress tested yet. But yeah, that's basically my thoughts. I mean, it's not anything new under the sun, and we've had people on Coffee Cakes and Kriegsspiel, talk more about this kind of pit boss idea,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not really been implemented in a structured way yet, I don't think.
Yeah.
And going forward, I would like to see someone, if not myself, pick this up.
So let me summarize this. One
Yeah,
one of the biggest problems with Kriegspiel is it's a phenomenal game, but the problem with it are the humans.
yeah,
If we could just eliminate the people, then I think Kriegspiel would be tremendous fun.
yeah.
You know? Okay, so what your system does is it does two things, I believe, with several advantages. And so the very first thing is that instead of an assistant umpire providing reports to every single player
Yeah.
on red and blue teams, they only provide reports to the players at the lowest level of command, basically those that are
Mm.
on the front where
Yeah.
the metal meets the meat, where something is also happening, right? Like if you
Yeah.
have a player who's behind the line and they're just doing marching simulator, you probably don't need to give them lengthy or detailed reports or have much interaction with them. Uh,
No.
you know,
But if you yeah, that's a fair point. But if that was the case, then you probably wouldn't need to man that division until the moment where they properly
correct,
come into play. I
correct.
would have thought.
But the bottom line is you could send them just a little thing, you continue to march. It's your only
Yeah.
report you need. And
Yeah.
there's no interaction. So, because one of the biggest problems we do run into is the lengthy umpire player interaction, especially
Yeah.
new players. They have a lot of questions.
Of course.
They start talking about the time they visited a battlefield,
Hmm.
or they start talking about rule mechanics, but what about my this or that? And what should take 60 seconds to maybe 120 seconds maximum
Mm.
turns into a 5-minute session. And it's often compounded when the players have what we call a tea party, right? Where they're
Yeah.
congregated
Exactly.
together and you got 3 or 4 guys there, because then you give the report, and as you're giving the report, the 3 guys start discussing it,
Yeah.
and making sense.
Precisely.
And so this would help to eliminate on that.
I mean, you still might have that a little bit because if there's
Sure.
two or three players in that room, and then one of them's going to be a courier, and one of them, if you've got three, maybe one of them might stay and be a staff member.
So
Um, but carry on with your question.
the second thing that this does is it turns human players into couriers.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if there's going to be a time savings, though, because somebody still has to physically move them from room to room. The same, they would have to copy and
Well,
paste a message.
this is the thing. They can report themselves to that transit room. The
If you
pit
give them
boss doesn't
permission
necessarily
to,
have to.
yeah, I guess if you elevate them, we'd have to create a special role
Yeah.
so they could see what they're, and hop around, but someone still has to regulate their time. So how do they
Well, that well that
know that, hey,
well that
no,
well
you've
this
got
is
to wait 2 turns versus 1 turn?
well, Well, this is the thing because it's yeah, it's more done in a real time kind of situation. So if I go back to this, so let's say in the scenario where Ben is coming in at half four, and he comes in and the pit boss is in that particular transit room, and the pit boss then jots him down and says, okay, at 20 to 5, you can move yourself to blue one.
Right.
Or I promise at 20 to 5, I'm going to come in because I've jotted it down and I'm going to put you in blue one.
Okay, so they
And
have
then
to
you give your
report to
report.
the pit boss, and then
Yeah,
the
pretty
pit
much.
boss tells them when they're free to go.
Yeah,
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, that's fine. Um, I like that, and what I really like about that is you had that thing where you had the unit with the interior lines,
yeah,
and so if I visit with Dave and I'm the courier, and Dave says send a dispatch to Jan, who is on the other side, on the right there, I
yeah,
then at the end of our turn, I then go to the pit boss. In fact, I go to the pit boss in real time probably, and the pit
yeah,
boss will say that the game is moving at a certain pace.
yeah,
So one turn delay is in 5 minutes. You can report to Jan, and
yeah,
then I report to Jan in real time.
yeah,
And
pretty
so
much.
if you guys have your act together, you
Yeah,
can send me back and forth much more quickly. And of course, having the interior line just takes more minutes off of it. Whereas
yeah,
for red, if I'm acting as a courier for red, I'm going to get to the pit boss and he's going to say, you got to wait 3 turns,
yeah,
because the distance is longer. Plus, if you don't have your act together and the commander on one end waffles, it's going to take him even longer to send you
precisely,
back, you know.
precisely.
I really like that. That's really, really interesting. And where I really see this happening is the guy on the field is going to then have to take a verbal report to the commander behind the lines. Now, the commander behind the lines, at least in Napoleonic warfare, should be able to see the battlefield or
He
some
should.
part of the battlefield where they're
Mm,
interacting.
yeah,
But in another game, like a more modern system where you're simulating radios or something, this would be a really interesting mechanic. I remember one time many years ago, I played an Eastern Front game and I was the Soviet commander, and I didn't even sit at the table where the map of players was. I sat at a
sure,
completely different table and I made my subordinates give me reports. I had my little
exactly.
copy of the map, but the umpire
Hmm.
never had to interact with me. And it
No,
was a really cool experience. It was different.
I mean,
Um,
the pit boss can still give screenshots every, if you ping him
right.
and say, look, I just want to clarify where I am, and then the pit boss, after maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes, he would have the time to send that screenshot and go, yeah, here you go, just to clarify, type
Now,
of
what
thing.
if a commander wants to move somewhere on the field? Because oftentimes in games, the
Mm,
commander has an umpire, and the umpire will visit the commander and they'll say, okay, move me to this division or this corps. So, would the commander just go to the pit boss like a courier and ask for
yeah,
permission to move?
essentially, yeah, he would then just report like anyone else to the transit room and say, yeah, I'm here at this time, checking in. How long is it going to take me to go from point A to point B where I want to go?
Yeah, yeah,
And then he's in transit, and then you might throw him a bone and say, okay, you go in 10 minutes, and then you'll see X, Y, and Z along the way.
yeah. Well, I think we have to give it a test. Jan, you're
I think we
here.
do.
We've been hogging the microphone. What are your thoughts?
Oh man, I have so many thoughts on that. I think, hmm. So I mean, having someone who is the watcher of the clock, so to say,
Hmm.
that's sort of that's an essential part of the historical setup, right? As it would be, you would have like the at least once we get into the 1870s and have like an actual live exercise game going, not when we're talking about Riceford, it's of course get the one team into the room, take their orders, send them out, get the other team into the room. But once we get into the 1870s, we have to set up that the teams, or even each like division staff or whatever you have, has their own table, is isolated, and when they want to communicate or give any orders, they write them down and bring them basically to a desk. Basically the courier umpire, so to say.
Yeah.
Who then grabs those and brings them to the timekeeper. The timekeeper would then check, okay, it will take so many minutes for that message to get there. And once that happens, the timekeeper hands over that message to the assistant umpire, who sort of represents the brigadier or the subordinate, whatever level have you, and then would start implementing those orders. And then it's the same way backwards, right?
Yeah.
The assistant umpire would, at some point where he thinks it's reasonable to give a report, would write a report, hand it to the timekeeper. Timekeeper calculates time, then hands it out to the desk, and then the desk rings a bell and says, "Hey, you guys, you have a message."
Yeah.
I don't know if in the system as you have described it, I have the impression that the timekeeper would be sort of overloaded with requests.
It could. Yeah, I mean, there is a risk that, you know, like I said, it is heavy on the timekeeper. But in theory, at least, if you kind of go back to my little interaction, his physical and verbal interactions are probably no more at any one time than you would have on a conventional setup that you know we've done over the years. I wouldn't have thought, because whilst you'll get requests, not everyone is going to have those requests at the same time. And in theory, at least, you'd still have this kind of thing, still, everything at the table, rolling on every 2 minutes, almost. So I think with a bit of practice and maybe ironing out some creases that we'll no doubt find along the way, I think we could do it. And like I said, if you have two timekeeper bosses that every few minutes just pop into the gaming table and just clarify the time with the head umpires and the assistants and say, okay, yeah, we're rolling on 5-10 minutes, whatever it is, just to put it on the board. I think it shouldn't be too hard to avoid any complications there. I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting to test it anyway.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I agree.
I will say that I'm generally speaking more and more of the impression that we shouldn't talk to the players at all, because that takes time in whatever way you do it. So yeah.
I mean,
do you want them to submit written orders then? Because
yeah, absolutely.
Then you have to interpret them. And that gets back to the roots of Kriegsspiel. The roots of Kriegsspiel is about writing orders. It's fundamentally an exercise about writing orders. But we've always dispensed with that, because if somebody writes an order, then you have to understand and interpret it. And with various levels of proficiency, like with the English language, now I don't mind if somebody wants to write the orders in German or some other language, if we have an umpire that can interpret that. But otherwise, what do you do if somebody has a really hard time with orders? Unless we develop a shorthand. Yesterday, Jan, we were practicing for Grand.
Your symbols and everything. The assault symbols and what have you. Yeah, I mean that could easily be done as well.
Yeah,
no, I'm quite opposed to those as well.
Yeah, I know you don't like the drawings. you don't like maps for some reason. So,
I like maps a lot.
No, you don't. You You don't like drawing on them.
I think it's totally fine if the assistant umpire doesn't understand the intent of the order, then it's the issue of the player, right? There's this weird Sun Tzu guy everybody talks about who says if the soldier doesn't understand the order, it's the general's fault.
But
and then he goes on, okay, if after the third time the soldier still doesn't understand, then he should probably be beheaded. But it's a different story then.
Yeah, but he also said that you shouldn't believe everything you read on the internet. So I don't know. I don't know how to take this guy. Obviously, they wouldn't let it be on the internet if it wasn't true. Right. Well, I think if we develop, we would have to develop a syntax or something, a way of writing orders so that people who lack English language proficiency can still communicate and be treated fairly. I hope you understand what I'm getting at, Jan.
I do understand what you're getting at. Yes, yeah.
I do, but I also say I believe that like the issues that stem from not understanding or not being proficient in expressing yourself are part of the simulation. I do understand though that it might frustrate players.
Yeah, for me, I see it as an access issue.
Right.
Because I don't know much in the way of German, and if I had to write my orders out in German, I would order my men to attack, but the order would be interpreted as stop and make coffee.
Let's say in this particular, I mean, there is another way that you can approach it in that, let's say you're not a native English speaker, but you do have a friend who has a good concept of both German and English or whatever. Then you could nominate him or her to be an assistant umpire, and to be at the table and to act, and be.
I can give my orders in my indigenous language, and that's just fine.
Sure.
Yeah. If we can facilitate that, I think it's excellent. But of course, we're not always going to be able to facilitate that.
No.
So.
But that's just general limitations on any given day, I would have thought.
Yeah. Well, people can speak a language just like I could speak Spanish well enough to survive in a Spanish environment, but I would not trust myself to write Kriegsspiel orders in Spanish. So, yeah. But anyway, I think this is something that we need to test. I'm going to do that Pearl Harbor event now on December 7th, which I'm starting to flesh it out, work on it today. And this would be interesting to have these interactions because the people who are in charge at the top are theoretically on an aircraft carrier or they're in a building somewhere and they don't have eyes on the situation and they're entirely reliant on reports back from, the pilots and people on the ground.
And I mean, if you've kind of seen the old Battle of Britain film and the Churchill war rooms and stuff where you have those ladies with the push sticks and stuff, but you got those other guys on the phone that are then directing them. Yeah, it's exactly the same concept.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I would hate to do that during the Battle of Britain, call center work. And I'm sorry that there's bombers incoming, but I am on my 10-minute break, so I'm going to have to leave you on hold. Oh, my goodness.
But I think it's worth something exploring in the near future. And if we do go ahead with your Pearl Harbor thing, I think it could work. I think it would be a good idea to try it.
Yeah, let's collaborate on that. And the other thing too is if there is a game or a scenario like Battle of Britain or something, we could just do a game where we resolve a day of the Battle of Britain, if you will. And that's another way that we could test this because again, that's where reports are coming in and out, and the players are actually updating the map for you. I mean, something like that would be really interesting because the players are also acting as their own assistant umpires. You know, they get
Almost,
a
yeah.
report, and the report is very simple. You know, 18 aircraft incoming over Dover on this heading. And that's all the umpire has to tell them. And when that's
Hmm.
all the umpire has to report, they can just go through boom, 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 and they could handle 12 players that way. You know, which
Yeah,
is
in theory.
an astronomical number. Normally, 4 to 8. You know, 8 if you're just an absolute Iron Man beast of an assistant umpire. But
Yeah,
really,
yeah.
4 is the limit for most human beings,
I'd say
and
so, yeah.
2 is pretty reasonable if people are relatively new.
Mm.
So, but if you can have one umpire handle 12 players, and the players are moving stuff themselves, that's an interesting scenario. You know, this system. What I'm saying is this system could probably work really well with certain kinds of games,
Mm.
and I think we need to test it there. And then we may find that in other kinds of games it does not work. Like the Napoleonic stuff, I don't know so much because the commander's usually going to be up there at the field. But it could work, and I bet when you wrote this system, that's what you had in mind was Napoleonics.
More or less, yeah. But
Yeah,
I mean, I still had that vision in my mind of the Battle of Britain and the pit and
yeah,
essentially the assistant umpires being those shuffleboard kind of people and just kind of listening really to what the brigade commander is saying to them. Just hopping backwards and forwards between the channel and going right. They moved and we've moved on in like 2-3 minutes. Still nothing. Anything else? No, done. Right. And then again, coming back and speaking to their opposite number and go, anything from you? Okay, we'll wait a few minutes and wait for the pit boss to come in and confirm the time again, or have a chat with the head umpire. I don't know. I think it's just less to concentrate on when, you're not managing all the people that we normally do in a conventional kind of setup.
yeah. Well, it'd be interesting to try. And I like the fact that it's on the players themselves, so that if you have
Yeah,
a player who spends a lot of time issuing or delivering a report, and the game is moving more or less in real time behind the scenes, that's
yeah.
actually kind of cool because players who want to be verbose are going to
Yeah,
be
they,
inherently
they lose
penalized.
time and
Yeah,
they therefore lose the initiative, and that's the name of the game. Yeah, that's war, right?
right.
Those who communicate effectively and quickly often have the advantage and come off the better.
Yeah, I agree. Well, yeah, I certainly support and advocate that we give this a test, and
Yeah,
you know, we'll learn lessons from it regardless of what happens. But we may find this is the greatest thing since, you know, sliced bread or tinned cans of margarine or something.
yeah. Don't. Yeah, but if that happens, I promise not to be let it get to my head.
Well, that's the fun part. That's why we do it, right? It's all about the
Yeah,
head rush.
that's right.
Jan,
But
what
no, no,
what are
thanks.
your thoughts?
Don't think I have any final thoughts to add.
Sure, fair enough. All right, Dave.
All right. Well, thank you very much for listening, everyone.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. I'm going to wrap up the podcast. I think we should. We are definitely agreed and pledged to give this a try sometime here real soon, and we might find that it makes a tremendous difference. And so I hope. All right. Thank you,
Me
everybody
too.
who checked out the podcast with us, and we will see you on our next adventure. Goodbye.